It's A-okay. And the recording now has finally started. So let's get to the decline of the Byzantine Empire, my cherub. So it's actually going to start really early. So we talked about Justinian. He was like the height of the Byzantine Empire. But during Justinian's reign, the end starts coming. You see a plague, probably the bubonic plague, starts hitting around 540. And they call it Justinian's plague, which guess what? That is not flattering. You do not want it to be Savona's plague or Lydia's plague or Hadrian's plague or any. You don't want a plague named after you. It's because they hated him. And they said, it's because you married Theodora, that actress. But yeah, so they named the plague after him, and it kills like maybe up to a third of the population of the Byzantine Empire, which is kind of redonkulous. That's millions of people. And then they have the other problem where it's going to be constantly under attack. And over time, they lose territory. So the beginning of the end of the Byzantine Empire starts all the way with Justinian. Then we have roughly 500 years of decline, which is a real bummer, right? So let's see this. So once again, reviewing, this is what the emperor's territory looked like during this time. We see the purple and the orange was all under Justinian's rule. It's a lot of land. It's big, almost the full Roman Empire. But then it's now just turned into this little purple. Hayden, can you please mute your mic so that we don't get those random noises? All right. And so the green is going to be the Abbasid Caliphate, and they are going to be the guys that are going to take most of the land, but they're going to lose it from all sorts. Yes, Nalay, what's your question, darling? You can say it out loud. You can type it. It's up to you.
So, how much did you say the decline was for?
About 500 years.
Like how long it was?
Because, the plague hits, in 540, and they're going to go, and that's the beginning of the decline. After Justinian dies, they're going to lose a ton of territory, because they had all this, and it shrinks down to this eventually. Because this is at like 850. So that's only 300 years later. They only have this little bit of land. And by the 1400s, they are literally only going to have like that black area where Constantinople is, and then a smidgen in the Crimean Peninsula. It's a real bummer. But yeah, so the decline takes roughly 500 years for it to happen. But even after 300 years, they're hurting pretty bad. So the Crusades, this is going to be an event here. We're going to talk a lot about the Crusades near the end of the year. You just need to know that the Byzantines and the Crusades are going to be really struck bad. The long short of it is with the Crusades is essentially the Crusades were a series of wars against Christians and Muslims to control the Holy Land, which would be Jerusalem. We're going to talk a ton about the Crusades at the end of the year, like I said. The Fourth Crusade was a total mess because it was not even a war between Christians and Muslims. The Crusaders from Western Europe came to Byzantium and said, "We want your boats to help us go to Egypt so we can go reconquer the Holy Land." And the Byzantine emperor says, "Well, you're going to have to pay us." And like, "We don't have any money." So then they say, "Well, how about you beat up some guys that we don't like, and then we'll help you out." And so they say, "Okay, that's great." So they go attack Sicily, those Crusaders attacking, another Christian kingdom. And they beat up the Sicilians. Well, actually, they were Normans there, and they wanted it back from the Normans. And then they go back and say, "We beat them up for you. Can we now have a ride?" But as a new Byzantine emperor, he's like, "No." But all of the Crusaders are already in the city walls, and then they wound up going and sacking the city because they were already in there. It's not like they had to get through the walls, and then it never recovers. They steal the gold off the gates. They steal so much. It's a real boomer. Now, also going with the decline is we're going to have constant attacks. So the Abbasid Caliphate is going to be conquering lots of land from them from the south, from the west, and from the east. And from the north, we have Russian armies attacking them as well. So we know that this all culminates in 1453, like we say in our song, before 1453, when the empire is destroyed with the fall of Constantinople. Actually, there's a guy who proclaims himself emperor, and he's like in this little smidgen of Crimea. He's like, "We're still the Byzantine Empire, I swear." But like, everyone's like, "Whatever, you've got like no land. We don't care about you." So we just acknowledge the end of 1453 CE. So Here's where it gets to be a ton of text, and you do not have to write everything down. I need you to know the basic gist of it, though. So the idea was there was once an amazing sultan of the Ottoman Empire. And you might be saying, Mr. Kenny, I do not know what the Ottoman Empire is, and that's because we haven't talked about it yet. We will, though. I promise. Just not yet. But there's a sultan of the Ottoman Empire named Mehmet the First. Now, when you see Mehmet the First, you're going to see Europeans spell his name wrong all of the time. So, for example, one source spells it Mehmed with a D. Most people nowadays say it Mehmet with a T. Other sources are completely wrong and just say Muhammad because I guess they were lazy or something like that. Well, anyways, Mehmet the First was like the greatest sultan ever in people's opinions. He conquered land. He was fair. He had great laws. He was just, the bee's knees. He's so good that he decides he wants to retire in his old age. He wants to relax, enjoy life. So he has his son, Mehmet II, or Mehmed II, or if you're really lame-o, Mohammed II, even though that was not even his name. I don't know why Europeans had to be so dumb when they wrote their histories. Said, guess what, sonny boy? You're going to be the new sultan. And it's a disaster. He's young. He's 19 years old. It's completely the worst. No one wants to listen to him. He has military disasters. It is just terrible. Mehmet I takes back the throne, winds up being a good ruler, but because he's old, he makes the mistake everyone seems to make and dies. So Mehmet II is thrust into power, and he says, I'm going to prove to everybody that I'm going to be even better than my father. And everyone's like, yeah, right, kid, you're going to be a disaster. But he says, I am going to conquer Constantinople. And then everyone's like, really? Yeah, right, kid, you're not conquering Constantinople. Because remember, they have those Theodosian walls, those 3 thick walls with moats in there and towers and all sorts of things to make you look like Swiss cheese and ruin your day. Remember, you don't have to be writing all of this down right here. But on the side, it like splits the screen over there, and we see happening around the same time in Transylvania. Yes, Transylvania is a real place. It's not just where Dracula lives. We have a guy named Urban, and he is making awesome cannons, really big cannons. He makes a monstrous gun that is 26 foot long. Now, for those of you who remember my classroom, I know it's been a long time, but I imagine Amanda or Celeste can like close their eyes and think back to my class. That's about as wide as my classroom was, from chalkboard to chalkboard. All right. This cannon would shoot a cannonball that was like over a ton, so over 1,500 pounds. So basically, like if we all stood on a scale together, it probably still would not be enough, and over a mile. And he goes to the Byzantine Emperor, Constantine XI, and says, hey, I would like to sell you this gigantic cannon. It's really great for blowing up your enemies and making them like have giant holes and not want to fight you anymore. And Constantine XI says, I would love to buy it from you, but I only have this much money. Is that enough? Urban of Transylvania says, no, it is not enough. I'm sorry, sir. This is not a charity. This is a cannon maker. So now Urban has this gigantic gun, has no one to sell it to until Mehmet II hears about it. And Mehmet II says, I would love to buy this gun from you. And it took 700 people to move and fire and load the gun. And that is wild. And guess what? A cannon that big is going to be able to knock down the wall. So here's the deal. We have 10,000 people under Constantine XI. He asked the West for help, and you don't really have to be writing this idea. You just need to know that Constantinople is going to be outnumbered. He gets a couple of Genoese and Venetian mercenaries, but he only has 10,000 soldiers. The Ottomans have 12,000 of the elite guard called Janissaries, which are like the best of the best. They're equivalent of our Green Berets, our Navy SEALs, all those folks, and then 120,000 regular soldiers. So 132,000 soldiers versus 10,000. So it is a huge disparity, a huge issue going on right here. And here again, another way of spelling Mehmet wrong. It's just the worst, these sources. I need to go back and just fix it all because I got these from different places. And he goes, blockades the city of Constantinople, and for 6 weeks, he goes and bombs the city with his cannons. And he has hundreds of cannons firing on the city 24/7, including that gargantuan cannon that is constantly blowing up huge holes into these walls. Eventually, they go and have all of their cannons pointed at one spot for the final breach and make a gigantic hole in there. Constantine XI fills the hole with his Venetian and Genoese mercenaries. 20,000 Ottomans go and start the attack. Now, the Janissaries, who are the elite of the elite, says, we're actually going to go in the back because we don't want to get killed. And the regular soldiers are forced to go in there. And they're battling, and it looks like the Genoese and Venetian mercenaries helping the Byzantines are going to wind up going and defeating, saving the city. But the Italian general is wounded. He's dying on the battlefield, and the Venetians and Genoese retreat. Then they start running away. The Constantinople begins to fall as the Ottomans flood through. Legend has it, Constantine XI goes up leading the final defense. He is there, the emperor of the Byzantine Empire. He draws his sword and leads a glorious charge into the massive forces of the Ottoman Empire. Legend has it, he is then trampled, but not trampled where he just dies, but that he's literally trampled so much because there's so much against him that he sinks into the stones. And then one day he will rise from the stones to lead an army glorious in retaking Constantinople in the name of Christendom. Now, that hasn't happened. That was about 500 years ago. So I'm not really holding my breath on him coming back. But this is the fall of Constantinople. The Hagia Sophia is turned into a mosque. And here we see the victorious Mehmet II as the people of Constantinople plead for mercy. So that is our notes for the day. What a happy way to end. I know. I'm sorry, guys. It's a bit depressing. I'm stopping the recording